3 years is a long time to share silence with someone you don't know. I ran the Kethvar Ridge checkpoint for 11 years before the scanner told me anything I wasn't expecting. Kethvar sits at 4,000 meters in the Skeln Mountain Pass, a garrison carved out of granite and cold wind, and its main business is logging border crossings, holding the ones who crossed wrong, and processing releases when the paperwork cleared. We weren't a prison technically, we were a pause. The Drev woman arrived in year 8 of my posting. She'd been found unconscious at the base of the ridge after what the patrol report called a skirmish, a polite word for whatever had happened to the shuttle that left a debris field across 2 kilometers of snowfield. She carried nothing, no identifiers, no wrist chip, housemark that anyone on staff could read. The medic who stabilized her said she'd live. After that, she became a holding matter, which meant she became mine. She woke 3 days later and didn't say a word for 4 more. Not hostility exactly, more like someone who had learned the cost of speaking and was deciding whether this situation warranted the expenditure. I didn't push. I logged her vitals, left food, changed the cell's air filters on schedule. The food was the same ration we served everyone: grain paste, protein block, water that tasted faintly of the mineral filtration system. She ate all of it. That told me something about where she'd been before she got here. After the first week, she started watching me when I brought the morning tray. Not the way prisoners watched when they were planning something. More like she was taking a measurement. I said, "You don't have to talk to me. You don't have to do anything. But if the food is wrong for your biology, tell me and I'll find something better." She looked at the tray for a moment. Then she said, "It's adequate." Her galactic standard was perfect, no accent, no approximation. The kind of fluency that comes from formal instruction, not proximity. "Good," I said, and left. That was how it went for a long time. I learned her rhythms the way you learn anyone's when you're responsible for their daily continuance. She slept in 2 intervals, short and long. She did a slow set of movements every morning that looked like exercise or prayer or possibly both. She read whatever I left in the cell: regulation manuals, survey maps, the battered fiction collection that had been circulating the garrison for decades, with the same focused attention she gave everything. She never asked me to adjust the cell temperature, never complained about the light cycle, never did any of the things that made a holding situation difficult. Once, during a bad storm, when the power grid stuttered and the cell door alarm sounded for 40 seconds before I got it silenced, she was standing at the center of the room, with her hands quiet at her sides, watching the door, waiting to see what happened next. Not afraid. Ready. The way veterans looked when they were accounting for variables. I reset the alarm and said, "False trigger. Power fluctuation." She nodded once. "I know," she said. I could hear the grid from the sound profile. After that, I started calling her by the designation in the log, Kethvar Hold 7, but only in my written entries. In person, I didn't call her anything, because I didn't have anything to call her, and making something up seemed like a presumption. In year 3, the multilateral processing agreement between the Drev Ascendancy and the Skeln Border Authority changed. All holds older than 2 years were required to complete a full biometric scan before release or transfer could be authorized. It was bureaucratic machinery, the kind of mandate that comes down from committees that have never visited a mountain checkpoint in winter. But the scan was also the only tool we had for surfacing identification when nothing else had worked. I told her about it the morning before. That was my practice. I told people what was going to happen before it happened. Tomorrow morning, biometric scan. Standard protocol, it won't hurt. If you want to know what the scan is looking for, I can walk you through the parameters. She was quiet for a moment. Then, find what it's looking for? An odd question. I don't know, I said honestly. That depends on what's in the database. She didn't say anything else. The scanner bay was 2 rooms down from the hold. I walked her there without restraints. She'd never given me a reason to use them, and ran the intake sequence the same way I'd run it 50 times. 4. Name field blank, house affiliation blank, origin system blank. I placed her hand on the biometric plate and let the machine do its work. The first result took 11 seconds. I was expecting a no-match flag. 3 years of searches through every registry we had access to had returned nothing. I had prepared, somewhere in the back of my mind, to tell her that she would likely be released to neutral territory, under provisional status, a non-person by documentation, and that this was not as bad as it sounded. The screen shows bloodline chain instead. I read it twice. Drev genealogical notation is complex, but I knew enough to follow the structure. And what the structure was saying was that the biological signature on this plate matched a lineage registered to the Drev royal house. Specifically, the Corvin line, which the ascendancy's own historical records listed as extinct, following a succession crisis 14 years ago. The system was still running. The second result came 40 seconds later, and it was the one I hadn't anticipated. The Drev biometric database doesn't only carry genealogy. It carries compatibility indices, the ceremonial matching records that the old ascendancy had used for formal contracts of union, bonded pairs, ruling partnerships. The indices had been included in the upload to the multilateral database as a historical artifact, the kind of thing that gets carried forward because no one thinks to leave it behind. My biometric reading, drawn from the garrison staff records uploaded 3 years ago when I was assigned to the checkpoint, was in that database. The compatibility glyph that appeared on the screen below the bloodline chain was not something I'd ever seen generated in a real scan. Seen the notation in a reference manual. I knew what it meant. Under Drev law, old law, the kind that predated the current ascendancy government by 4 centuries. A confirmed compatibility reading between a member of a royal line and any free individual constituted a provisional bond contract. Provisional, meaning it required acceptance from both parties to hold. But the scan had run, the reading was generated, and the database had already logged the result. I stood there for a moment and looked at the screen. Then I printed the result on paper, actual paper, because some things you didn't leave only in a system, and walked her back to the cell. She sat down on the low bench. I stood in the doorway. I held the paper and looked at it, and then looked at her. Your name, I said, according to the Drev genealogical registry, is Vesa Corvin. The registry lists the Corvin line as extinct. It's wrong. She was very still. Scan also generated a compatibility index, I said. I'm told it doesn't happen often. Mine came up against yours. I paused. Under the old ascendancy codes, that reading is a provisional contract, which requires your acceptance to mean anything. I want you to know that. The cell was very quiet. I had served at Kethvar Ridge for 11 years. I had processed hundreds of holds. I had run the job with the understanding that the people who passed through this checkpoint were owed basic decency, regardless of what had brought them here. Food that fit their biology, honest information about their situation, and the knowledge not someone on the other side of the door was paying attention. That was the whole of it. She looked up at me. Silver eyes had a quality I hadn't seen in 3 years of daily proximity. Not distance, not measurement, careful readiness of someone accounting for variables. Something else. You knew none of that, she said, for 3 years. No, I said. And you, she stopped. Started again, the food, the storm, the walking me through the parameters. That's the job, I said. She was quiet for a long time. Then she reached out and took the paper from my hand. She looked at it the way she looked at everything, completely. Out hurry. Doran Hask, she said. She'd read my name from the scan result. It was the first time she'd used it. I accept the reading. I nodded. Wasn't sure what I was supposed to say to that. I said the thing that seemed true. Then I'll need to start calling you something other than Hold 7. Something shifted at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile. Beginning of one. Vesa, she said, will do. I picked up the morning tray from the corridor, set it inside the door, and told her I'd start the transfer paperwork. There was a lot of it. The Drev ascendancy was going to need to be contacted. There were protocols for a returned royal line, and protocols for a confirmed compatibility bond, and I had no doubt that every one of those protocols was going to come down on this checkpoint like an avalanche. But that was tomorrow. That morning, I pulled a second chair into the scanner bay, made 2 cups of the garrison's terrible coffee, and went back down the hall to ask Vesa Keorvin if she wanted to sit somewhere other than that cell for an hour. She did.